Today's a big day for net neutrality, I would say. And joining us to talk all about why is Russell Brandom from The Verge. How's it going, Russell?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to get you on today. So I guess first things first, tell us a little bit about today's decision in the Federal Appeals Court.
Yeah, so the big news, which people will probably remember, is the FCC classified the internet as a Title II service, which is a fancy way of saying it's net neutrality. They're going to, prevent carriers from sort of interfering with traffic in transit the same way they do for sort of telephones. And so that was a big deal. And I think a lot of the people who weren't happy about it, particularly cable companies, immediately said, well, no, you don't have the legal authority to do this. Because, every previous FCC effort in this direction, they had gone to the Federal Appeals Court, and the Federal Appeals Court had said, no, that doesn't make any legal sense. You can't do that. And this time, they didn't say that. It was sort of the most ambitious push. They had been sort of not eating the whole cake legally. And this time they said, okay, we're going to do Title II. And after this 20-year fight, and they won the legal decision that was the hurdle they kept not being able to get over. So it's a big, I think net neutrality fans are breathing a huge sigh of relief today. On the other side, it's not a complete end slate victory because AT&T's comment was, AT&T being on the cable company side, said, well, we always expected this to be settled by the Supreme Court. So we can anticipate this going to the Supreme Court in the future. But for now, things are looking pretty good for net neutrality.
Whatever. No big deal. Doesn't hurt us. Doesn't affect us. We knew we were going to Supreme Court anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, no big deal.
That's basically exactly how they said it.
Yes. That's how it went down. So, let's flip kind of the outcome a little bit and just kind of, talk about what we would be seeing now if the outcome had happened in the other direction. What would we be talking about at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways that the Federal Circuit could have limited the ruling without completely throwing it out. One of the things that surprised a lot of people in the initial announcement was that wireless carriers are also included in this. Mm-hmm. So that, if Verizon Wireless wants to start slipping ads into my data stream, or they want to charge me more if I'm going to the wrong websites, that's also included. They're not allowed to do that under this order. And it was sort of, a lot of people were surprised that the ruling went that far. But one of the interesting things that happened in arguments during the case is one of the judges said, wait, so if I'm watching a YouTube video on my phone at one end of my house and I have Wi-Fi, and then I walk to the other end of my house and the Wi-Fi doesn't reach and I go onto 4G, but I keep watching the same video, are we really going to use a different set of laws for one end of my house than the other, even though I can't even tell that there was any difference in what happened? And I think that, that argument ended up winning, but it's easy to imagine, that not happening and sort of wireless service diverging in this whole other direction from, wired internet.
So what they're saying is we should treat wireless service the same as the cable companies?
Yeah, and all of it the same as the telephone. So it's all going to be sort of a level playing field, common carrier status of, it's the tubes are going to stay dumb, as they say. Dumb tubes, smart data.
I mean, I think that's interesting because that's the way most people see it. That's definitely the way the next generation sees it. I mean, They don't really see the difference. Go ahead, Becky.
Oh, I was just going to ask Russell kind of on a sidebar here, which is, this may or may not go up to the Supreme Court. It's their choice to take this. So this may be the final ruling here. But if it does, we're in a 4-4 split right now with 8 judges. This issue has been so politicized. It's been called Obamacare for the web. Yeah. How do you see this in terms of where it's going to fall along party lines, especially when this really feels like a consumer issue where it's sort of the consumer versus big business, and we're seeing Joe Sixpack kind of kicking the Republican Party in the jimmy as they're opting for Trump. How's this gonna play out?
I mean, it is the 4-4 split. I think will be. Some people have speculated that, well, actually, we might see some Republicans come over. I mean, I think the relevant issue is it's sort of a regulatory power versus corporate power. Like, does Verizon have the right to distinguish between data that is on the fiber optic cable that's owned by Verizon? And I think a lot of sort of from, I guess, the libertarian jurisprudence tradition, people would say, well, yeah, why does the FCC suddenly have a say over what these cable companies do on the cable that they own? And I think that's, without reading tea leaves, I think that's probably an argument that Justice Scalia would have found, convincing. But now we're in this 4-4 split, and maybe some of the less reliably, I think the judges, I wouldn't even say conservative liberal, but the judges who are less sort of staunch defenders of sort of corporate rights over corporate property. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't see any of the four, traditionally Democratic justices moving over. And I think, I don't know, it's tough. I'm not as good at reading the Supreme Court tea leaves, but I do think at the very least we'd be looking at a 4-4 split. And it may well be that the Supreme Court just lets this stand.
And it does seem like in the court of public opinion that the consumers have weighed in, and today's judgment is a victory for the everyman. So it would be definitely going against the run of play if they were to overturn this, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what about a possible replacement of Tom Wheeler in the FCC? Would that have a big impact on the potential of something like this being undone in any way?
Yeah, I mean, so, all the court rulings are just saying the FCC has the power to do this, and so it would be a little tricky to immediately, in the Trump administration, bring in someone else who just sort of slams on the brake pedal. I mean, I think the word that they always use is regulatory uncertainty, where, Comcast doesn't want to have to build all this expensive infrastructure and invest all this money thinking that the regulatory rules will be a certain way, and then every 4 years they just flip to new regulatory rules. Like, that's not really helpful for anyone. It's not helpful for their consumers. It's not helpful for their business. So I think it would be weird to immediately sort of say, okay, 2 years later, we're just pushing the way back button, and we're just going to undo all this. Having said that, new FCC commissioners have the power to set new rules. So there have been changes in FCC policy in the past, and there will be changes in FCC policy in the future. So there's nothing written in stone about it. And I think that, that's more likely to me than a judicial restraint at this point.
And I guess finally, what's come up in this whole net neutrality discussion here and there, at least very recently, are zero rate services, things like Binge On with T-Mobile and stuff. Is that affected with this?
So that is not a part of the scope of the ruling. So they very specifically say, these new wireless, the powers in the open internet sort of order. He says this doesn't apply to zero rating. We see this as an innovation that's happening, and we're keeping a close eye on it, but we're not, this isn't restricting that. They might restrict it in the future. That's certainly something the FCC is going to keep a close eye on. But I think, for net neutrality, sort of the groups that have been advocating this for so long, that's kind of the next hill that they're looking at. But it isn't, it's sort of the victory after this one.
Sure. Well, Russell Brandom, always a pleasure getting you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today and telling us all about this. Where can people follow your work specifically online?
Oh, yeah. Russell Brandom. That's at RussellBrandom on Twitter.
Excellent. And TheVerge.com for all of his excellent stories. Thank you again, Russell.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks for having me.